Dr. Kalin, what is Turkey's position on the involvement of Iranian-backed Shia militias taking on Daesh in Tal Afar?
In Tal Afar, there is a very delicate situation where when Daesh took control of cities like Mosul and Tal Afar, Daesh, that is, played to the grievances of the local Sunni people there, who felt for years, especially after the American invasion in 2003, that they were marginalized, they were dispossessed, they were not treated properly or fairly in the general Iraqi political scene, and the sectarian policies of the Maliki government, two Maliki governments. The first one, I think, was reasonably acceptable to most of the Sunnis, but the second Maliki government turned increasingly sectarian and stoked this sectarian feelings. And this is where Daesh, in fact, entered in and played into these fears. Now, we do not want to end up with a situation with this anti-Daesh operations going on in Mosul, in Tal Afar, and other places, where the policies lead to the very causes that created the conditions for Daesh to arise in the first place.
Given the sensitivities, the Turkish sensitivities around Tal Afar, is there a red line where Turkey, if it sees such atrocities being committed in Tal Afar, can intervene more forcefully?
We are hoping that things will not come to that point. But of course, in northern Iraq, let me also underline a very important security threat against Turkey. And the main threat comes from the PKK presence in Kandil and in Sinjar. Of course, we see Daesh as a threat, and we fought against Daesh along our borders in Syria.
And YPG.
Which is right across the Turkish border, as well as the YPG, which is an offshoot of the PKK. And we've said all along that these are two terrorist organizations that have to be eliminated from our borders, and because they pose threats not just to us, but to the Iraqi people, to the Syrian people, and to everyone.
President Erdogan recently said that Turkey was prepared to expanding military operations. What did Erdogan mean by expanding military operations, and against who?
As far as Turkey's national security is concerned, the border security is concerned, we will do what is necessary within our power and limit and capacity. Of course, we will coordinate, with the countries in the region, but once it's a matter of national security, Turkey will do what is necessary. Our president is, in fact, laying out a general principle here that when we perceive a threat coming from Syria, Iraq, or any other country, we will do what is necessary.
So what is then a red line for Turkey in northern Syria and northern Iraq? What needs to happen for Turkey to move?
PKK is a Marxist-Leninist organization now supported by the United States. Look at this irony. And these PKK ideologues claim to have the ideology of Marxism, Leninism, socialism, struggle for the people, and all of that. And they're trained in American camps, the most capitalist, most anti-communist, most anti-Marxist, Leninist, country in the world.
But they say that the YPG is the only force capable of taking on Daesh.
Well, why? Let's question that proposal. YPG is able to fight the fight that it is fighting right now because of the American support. If those thousands of truckloads of weapons and ammunition had gone to another group, say Free Syrian Army or Turkomans or Sunni Syrian Arabs, they will have been the most effective force against Daesh. Now, what will happen? Of course, there is no guarantee that the support that they are providing to YPG will end up with just the defeat of Daesh. It will create other problems. It will have ramifications for the future of Syria. How are we going to keep Syria together?
Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this, the ramifications, and let's put the US on the side. You have and President Erdogan recently met the Iranian army chief. Yeah. What are these discussions about? What is being discussed behind closed doors between the Turks, the Iranians, and the Russians?
We talked about the fight against terrorism, Daesh terrorism, PKK terrorism.
In Syria?
In Syria, in Iraq, of course, we talk about that. We talk about Palestine. We talk about common regional challenges. We talked about sectarian relations and tensions. We talked about Yemen.
Any joint operations in the future?
Not immediately, but of course our military mill-to-mill cooperation and dialogue will continue. And our president will be paying a visit to Iran sometime in September, because now you have a new government, President Rouhani being sworn in again, and we congratulate him for his second term. And we will pay an official visit to Iran sometime in September, so that we renew our commitment to our shared goals in the region.
In the past year, there's been a coup in this country. 250 people were killed in this country during that coup. But there have also been challenges. 50,000 people have been detained or are under arrest. 170,000 people are being investigated for ties to terrorist groups, including the Fethullah Gulen network, which Turkey says is behind or was behind this coup attempt. Do you think Turkey's post-coup measures have been justified?
It's our duty to our nation to make sure that these things do not happen in this country again. Now, you have to take certain measures. If you look at the numbers, some people, especially in Europe and other places, may find them too high, but Turkey is a big country. It's an 80 million people country. And the measures we have taken are not out of proportion if you put it in a comparable context. For example, when the two Germanys united in 1989, East Germany and West Germany, the new German state fired more than 500,000 people from East Germany, more than 500,000 people, on the suspicion that they worked for the East German intelligence organization Stasi. And they were treated as potential agents in their own country. They were promised to be reinstated at some point. Those who were expelled from the military, bureaucracy, universities, other places, they were never reinstated. As far as I know, very small number of those people really came back to state institutions.
You're talking about reinstatements. The Turkish government has announced it's reinstated 34,000 state employees in the past year who were investigated and no links were found. Is this a recognition that even in this process mistakes might have been made? To
the contrary, it shows the extent to which the government is willing to go to accommodate these complaints. In fact, we have now an independent commission. Those who have been investigated, who have been either sacked or fired or put on hold, they can go to this independent commission, and which they are now, put in their request and put in their make their case, and they can be reinstated. So it shows that in fact there is a legal way, a legal protection for those who have done no harm, who have not been implicated in any of the coup attempts or the Gülenist network.
You and I both know if somebody has been accused who might not be guilty of being a member of a terrorist organization, their lives are affected at a very personal level. Families are disrupted. What impact has this had, in your understanding, on people?
Turkey is safer today than it was a year ago. Politically, human security-wise, economically. If you look at the economic figures, for example, if this coup had happened in another country, in the way it did happen in Turkey, for example, the economy will have collapsed. The whole private sector will have collapsed. Trade volumes and all these things will have gone down the drain. What happened? Turkey has scored 5% growth rate, which is one of the highest in the world at the moment. And now we are in the summer season. The tourism is booming again. Millions of tourists are pouring into Turkey. Foreign investment is coming. Why? Because they see Turkey as a safe place. Some people may claim and may try to paint Turkey as a non-safe or unsafe place, etc. Unfortunately, some of our local politicians, like our opposition leader, makes those statements sometimes, statements like that from time to time to Western media. But the reality is that
he also says that you're using the post-coup reality to crack down on the opposition.
I'll come to that. But the very people whose media outlets publish this kind of stuff, that Turkey is not safe, are vacationing in Turkey and posting pictures, beautiful pictures from Bodrum, Marmaris, Antalya, from the Mediterranean and the Aegean Sea on social media and saying that Turkey is great. Come and vacation here. So, this is a great irony. Coming back to your question, about using the post-coup reality to crack down on the opposition. The opposition is out there. It's in the parliament. It's on the street. I mean, they have their own means. They have their own political parties and organizations. They just held a rally, a long walk from, well, a couple of weeks ago, from Ankara to Istanbul, and he was not interrupted. If they want to hold, a regular rally, etc.
So it's completely untrue that the opposition is being...
No, of course. I mean, they're there. I mean, they're out there. As I said, they can protest. They object to the policies. Of course, they should do it, with knowledge, with reason, with wisdom, with conviction.
But then there's also conflation. They also conflate many other issues that opposition. The politicians are arrested, for example.
Well, who are they? For example, those who've been in prison. For example, the former co-chair of HDP party, for example, not because of anything related to the coup, but because of their support for the PKK terrorist organization. And they unfortunately have squandered a historic opportunity by not supporting the initiative that the government launched to resolve the Kurdish issue. Instead, they've become a mouthpiece for the PKK. They never condemned a single PKK terrorist organization over the last 4, 5 years, 6 years. There was a hope that HDP will become the channel by which they will separate themselves from the PKK and its terrorist activities. They will become a legitimate political party. They will fight, for the rights within the legal framework of the country. Instead, they've chosen to whitewash and justify PKK's murderous policies. And they are in prison because of their support for the PKK. I mean, they've been caught red-handed. One MP, I believe, who's run to Germany now, who's fled to Germany, was caught, in fact, in his car with weapons going to the PKK. And he claimed that he is an MP, he has immunity, and no one should investigate him. But he was providing weapons to the PKK. Imagine this happening in Spain, where a Spanish MP in the Catalan region, carrying weapons to ETA in his car. What will the Spanish authorities do? Or during the IRA, issue, for example, in Northern Ireland. Just imagine an Irish MP, carrying weapons or providing other kinds of material support to the IRA. What will the British authorities or Irish authorities do? It's not any different from that. So we try to explain this, to the people. They're welcome to express their opposition.
So what makes Turkey then such a target, and the Turkish government such a target for the Western media? In your opinion, why is Turkey then singled out when it is trying to preserve, as you say, its interests and its sovereignty?
I see a growing obsession in the Western media, particularly with President Erdogan. And I see this also among some Western politicians, where they conveniently point or single out President Erdogan to deflect the Western public opinion from the real issues in their own countries to some distant other. When you single out President Erdogan, oh, he's a dictator, he's an autocrat, he's done these crazy things, etc., then you conveniently avoid the issues of unemployment in Europe, the issues of, for example, petty crimes, or issues of criminal gangs in the big cities in Europe, the failure of multiculturalism, the failure or the destruction of the family, erosion of religious values, and all these issues, sexism and racism and Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, xenophobia, all these things, you conveniently put them aside and you say, there's a bigger problem here. Let's deal with that. So it's really a deflection from the real issues. And it becomes a very convenient tool for them to identify a distant other and demonize it so that they feel good about themselves.
You're a scholar of Islamic philosophy with a focus on Muslim-Christian relations. And you're talking about the othering of Turkey and much of the other world that is not part of the West. Why do you think all of this is going on right now? The othering is still continuing for Turkey.
I think that's really a big challenge for all of us. Not only politically, but ethically, morally, psychologically. At a time when we think that globalization has narrowed down the the divides between different cultures and societies. But paradoxically, we are also getting further away from each other. The virtual world of social media, etc., creates illusions that we are so close, we know each other. There is no depth there. In any human interaction, you need depth, you need warmth. You lose that, in the illusory world of the social media, etc. So we feel good about ourselves that, oh, I have so many followers, I follow so many people, I see what he's doing and what that celebrity has said, etc. They don't really contribute to the well-being of the world when, we still deal with issues of racism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and xenophobia and all these issues. My humble proposal, which I try to articulate, in different venues, is that every time we make an assertion about ourselves, we also assume that there is another out there. But that other doesn't have to be our enemy. The other doesn't have to be our hell, as Sartre claimed once, that the other is the hell. No, it doesn't have to be. In fact, we can learn from the other.
What is the lesson that we can learn from the US right now, from Virginia and Charlottesville?
As you have seen, for example, there, the white supremacists, and they are plain racists who claim that, by birthright or by the color of their skin, they are superior to other people, to blacks, to Asians, to Muslims, to Latinos maybe, and other people. And you see this. This is again one of the greatest paradoxes of our age, that you see this rising tide of racism and Islamophobia and xenophobia in some of the wealthiest countries of the world, which are ruled by democracy, which are supposed to hold the principle of multiculturalism, pluralism, and you see this where you have instant communication, you have infinite opportunities to reach out to different people, get to know people, etc. But to the contrary, you have this terrible trend, in some of the most affluent countries in the world.
How do you communicate as Turkey's leadership? How do you communicate this and your reservations about this to the US?
Of course, we try to do it, through our channels and in different ways. But I think we all have to learn the ethics of coexistence at a time when we have lost the sense of, living with other human beings who are different from us without necessarily creating antagonisms between us. Now, as far as these recent events in the United States are concerned, of course, they are a source of concern. I think it should be a source of concern for all of us, not only for Americans, because it has a trickle effect everywhere else, because it can easily empower similar racist groups and movements in Europe and other places. It has happened, in fact, over the last couple of decades. For example, in certain key European countries, you have elections, and then immediately this anti-immigrant, anti-minority political populism becomes very powerful. Like in Germany, for example, like in Austria and other places. Plainly racist groups finding a place in the mainstream political and cultural arena in the middle of Europe. You will have thought that Europe had overcome all these issues. No, they keep coming back, and there is more racism in Europe now than any other part of the world, and Europeans have to face this reality. That why is this racism creeping back again after centuries of wars and religious wars and sectarian wars in Europe and European colonialism and racism and all of that? Why does this keep coming back? I think it's a big question for European politicians, European thinkers, European religious figures to ask for themselves, because those issues in Europe or the United States do not stay there. They spread to the rest of the world.
What is going on in President Erdogan's mind right now when it comes to Turkey, when it comes to the Middle East, when it comes to Turkey's place in the world? Tell us a little bit about what he is thinking and where his vision is for the future of this country.
Well, his vision has been all along, first of all, to create a safe, stable, prosperous, democratic Turkey. And he's worked really day and hard. And that's why he addressed the most difficult issues in our recent history, from the Kurdish issue to religious minorities, opening up to the rest of the world, to many other issues, in ways that no other politician would have really dared to do. He addressed the Kurdish issue head on. Now our Kurdish citizens can speak their mother tongue, which was almost impossible 10 years ago. They can publish, they can broadcast, they can do political propaganda, they can use Kurdish in courts, in prisons, in the streets, everywhere. There are TVs and so on and so forth. He addressed religious minorities issues. He reached out to the Armenians and the Jews and the Greek Orthodox community of this country, the Syrians, Assyrians and others, in Turkey. He has reached out to the world. When he became prime minister in 2003, the very first trips he took were to Europe to energize and mobilize both Turkey and the European Union for Turkey's accession to the European Union as a full member. And he was able to get a deal in 2004, and in 2005, it's been 12 years, he was able to start the official accession process for Turkey. It's been 12 years. Only one chapter out of 35 has been opened and closed. It's been 54 years since Turkey applied for the first time for full membership in the European Union, and we are still kept at the door there. Now, it cannot be just our fault, right? I mean, there were times when we failed our duties, no doubt, in this 54-year period. But it cannot be just our fault. In 12 years, only one chapter being open and closed, and the conditions that were never applied to any other country are being applied to Turkey now to make it even harder, for Turkey to become part of the European Union. And then, some people, some critics turn back and say, oh, you see, Turkey is failing the European standards, etc. But who is really failing the core European values? Is it us or the Europeans themselves? When it comes to the migration crisis, who is really failing the European, self-proclaimed European values of human dignity, the value of human life? They just want this problem to disappear. They don't want to do anything about it. They just want other countries, to pick up the pieces, like Turkey, like Iraq, like Lebanon and Jordan. Let others deal with it. We don't want to see these migrants in our countries, in our streets. And what are the arguments for that? It's not economic. What is worse is that, it's a culturalist argument. Suddenly, when they see a migrant, a minority group coming from, Northern Africa or Afghanistan or Syria, they suddenly remember their pure white European identity. How is that reconcilable with core European values of multiculturalism and pluralism and being open to the world and so on and so forth? I think it's very easy for them to preach us and the rest of the world about these values. But I think they should question themselves. They should have a soul searching within themselves, whether they're really, living up to the standards of the principles of the values that they set for themselves. So the President Erdogan has been open, to Europe and to other parts of the world. We have expanded our foreign policy outlook by 360 degrees. We have opened up to Africa, to Asia, to the Middle East, to the Balkans, to Latin America, to the Far East. We have good relations, with the Far Eastern countries, Japan and others. We are developing very good relations with China, of course, with India, Pakistan, many countries in Africa, and so on and so forth. So now, when you have this 360-degree foreign policy outlook, some people, some critics again, began this line saying that, Turkey is moving away from the West. When in fact, at the time of globalization, where is the West, where is the East? You have to engage all key political actors in the world. And when other countries do it, like European countries do it, when the British or the French engage Southeast Asia or Africa, it's fine. When Turkey does it, it's like, Turkey is moving away from the West. Turkey is not slave to anybody. Turkey is a sovereign, independent country trying to better itself and help others around its neighborhood so that the Greeks feel safe and live in better economic conditions. The Bulgarians share with us the same economic concerns or opportunities so that Syrian people live in peace and security and prosperity. So the Iraqis, the Iranians, and many others. So we've tried, and of course we continue to try to create an environment of peace and stability, not just for Turkey, for all of us, because we know for a fact that in this age of globalization, You cannot live in peace and security when you're surrounded by all kinds of deep problems and crises. You have to deal with all of this so that, you know, if you want your home to be safe, you have to make sure that your neighborhood is safe. And, you know, we try to work to create this environment with regional actors as well as with global actors. It's not just about reforming the UN Security Council. It's really a message to the rest of the world that there is not justice in this current global order. And it's creating all these problems of terrorism, migration crises, unemployment, resentment, the rising tide of Islamophobia and racism and anti-Semitism, all these things. Because you cannot establish peace without justice. You have to have justice. Peace has to be based on justice in order for it to be sustainable.
Dr. Kalin, thank you so much.
My pleasure.